Welcome back to the Executive Code podcast. You're very, very welcome. If you are a regular listener to this podcast, you'll know that we talk about life purpose and personal mastery. And if you'd like the content that is shared on this podcast, it would be absolutely brilliant if you gave us a review or a comment, 5-star review on your iTunes player or whatever it might be, whatever platform that you use to listen to your podcast. You can also watch our podcast on our YouTube channel. The link is going to be within the show notes itself. But we're here to discuss everything to do with life purpose and personal mastery. If you want to find out more details, head over to our website, paulwilliamdavis.com, and everything is there for you. So Nicole, what question have you got for us today?
So Paul, we all know we are made up of 3 parts, right? Spirit, soul, and body. How are they linked to our Genius Pendulum? And how can we optimize that relationship between them?
Okay, good. And this is actually a really, really deep question. So it just depends on how deep we go in this one. I have no idea where we're going to go, but anyway, I'll just respond. They are absolutely aligned to your Genius Pendulum. All right. What I'm going to say to you is that so when I talk about the Genius Pendulum, again, for listeners that may not be familiar with that, your overarching purpose in life is to be your genius you, to live life fully, to experience, to love, and to evolve. If you can imagine a pendulum and visualize a pendulum, when a pendulum is in equilibrium, it's in a vertical state. It's not moving, it's literally just in a vertical state. When it's out of equilibrium, it's either to the left or to the right. Now just think of a pendulum as being like, the pendulum that you would see on a grandfather clock. So once you have that image of a pendulum, now you'll understand when it comes to a genius pendulum, the genius pendulum is for ourselves to be in equilibrium. And there's a lot of different things that will actually throw us out of equilibrium. So whether it be, the different emotions that we would feel in the sense of fear or worry or anxiety, or where we feel, proud or cocky about ourselves, or whether we are either too humble or too shameful or guilt. There's so many different things that will literally push our genius pendulum out of equilibrium. If we want to be more in line with, as you say, the 3 parts, our spirit, our soul, and our body, well, then you've got to look at your genius pendulum as being, our whole aim is to try and bring that pendulum into equilibrium. Now, the universe is constantly trying to give us feedback in order to help us, to guide us, or to instruct us in how to bring back our pendulum into equilibrium. But if we go to our overarching purpose in life, and our overarching purpose in life is to be our genius you, your genius you is when you are in equilibrium. So if you were to go back to pretty much the very first few episodes of this particular podcast, I outlined the executive code. And what the executive code, part of what it's to do, is about bringing you into equilibrium. And what I outlined within that is that you've got your executive center part of your brain, you've got your unconscious, and then you've got the superconscious. When your genius pendulum is in equilibrium, you've got alignment between your executive center, your unconscious, and the superconscious. So when you're asking the question in terms of your spirit, your soul, your body, it's more from a point of view of how can you bring that genius pendulum into equilibrium. So is it linked? It absolutely is linked. What does it mean? It means your true essence. What I mean by that is it's the true you. It's your genius you. And it's it's how you be your genius you. So where a lot of people would try to be somebody else, to try and emulate somebody else or copy somebody else or so, that's when they're not being their genius you. When they're judging themselves or judging other people, you're not being your genius you. You will absolutely know when you're in equilibrium because you will have that alignment. But to understand it, when your genius pendulum is in equilibrium, you are in a state of love. Now, love is not infatuation. So think of it from a perspective of where you find somebody new in your life, a new partner and so on. For the first period of time, what I call the honeymoon period, you'll be infatuated about that individual. But then after the honeymoon period ends, you now start to see all the faults within that individual. And then now you start to move that individual from being infatuated with them to somebody that you want to literally smack across the head. So that's how you're moving that individual from one side of the pendulum to the other side of the pendulum. But ultimately, what you want to do is the central point or the equilibrium point of your genius pendulum is love. And when you're in a state of love, now what you're ultimately seeing is you're seeing both sides. So when it comes to an individual, for example, you're seeing the good parts and you're seeing the not so good parts of that individual. But because you're actually seeing both parts or both sides, you're now more objective. And therefore now you have a state of love for that individual, because you not only recognize those parts that you perhaps maybe dislike, but you're now observing those parts within yourself. And therefore that's how now you have true love for that individual, unlike infatuation. So I can go into, each element, the soul, the spirit, and the body, and I can answer each one of those questions if you want. But that's my first go off in terms of how your genius pendulum is aligned to those three parts.
And you might have answered this question before in like a previous episode of, the podcast, but how do we know that our genius pendulum is aligned?
So have you, let me explain it this way then. Have you ever had a moment in your life where, and it could have been through meditation or some activity that you were doing, whereby you lost all sense of time and space?
Yeah, rarely, but yes.
Yeah, rarely. For the very vast majority of people, it's rarely. Or you've had a sense whereby you've had that moment of inspiration, and that moment of inspiration has had an overwhelming emotional response that wells up inside you. Ever have that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that overwhelming emotional response will absolutely be from a point or an inspiration of love. When you really drill it all the way down, it will actually, the source is love. And the source is infinite intelligence or infinite possibilities. When you absolutely drill down into that piece, you'll actually find those elements. And that's what you will start to describe those moments of inspiration as being, because inspiration, if you look at the origin, is divinely given. So when you drill down into it, what you find is absolute love, absolute inspiration. You'll have no sense of time and space. You're literally just in that moment. And some people will refer to as being you're in a flow state, or you literally are doing something that everything else is just you for one better word, you don't see anything else. You're literally just in that moment. So that's when you know you're in equilibrium. Now, the vast majority of people aren't in that stage for the vast majority of the time, but therefore, how can we bring ourselves to that state? And we can.
And it's not just a feeling, it's more of a knowing.
Yeah.
To describe it, but that's how I think it would be closest.
Yeah.
And does it come about when we do deep work? Because I know that, when I'm really focused on a task, is it the same thing?
You can have elements in deep work whereby you'll get glimpses of it, but you may not have that awe-inspiring emotional response or that love attaching to those particular moments. When you've got those moments whereby it's you have that emotional response, it's automatic, you don't create it, it's divinely given. You literally just have that literally overpowering love for everything in those moments. That's when you're in equilibrium. And that is when you are completely and totally and utterly aligned with, hence the reason why I go back to outline the executive code. When you're completely and utterly aligned with your executive center, with your unconscious, and then with the superconscious, that's when you're completely in line. Because if you look at those three elements that you outlined in the question, your soul, your spirit, and your body, you've got to understand each one of those elements to really fully comprehend what I'm describing in terms of those moments. And those moments can they be extended, and can you have an awful lot more of them? You absolutely can. It's literally what I'm bringing my clients through and members within the Pilots Lounge. I'm trying to get them to that point so that they can get to experience an awful lot more of that. And therefore, that's where their life becomes an awful lot more effortless. So can it be experienced, Nicole? Absolutely can. Yeah.
And what are some things that we can start doing, today to achieve and maintain that state where the genius pendulum is aligned?
Okay, so there's so many different things that you could do. First of all, okay, let me put it this way. And I know people are going to listen to this podcast and say, okay, this guy is biased. Of course I'm biased because I know the difference. I absolutely know the difference for people. And one of the first things that I'm going to say is you've got to be on purpose. Because when you're on purpose, you are absolutely have that clarity and certainty and vision of what it is that you're here to create. So you are unconsciously, again, when you understand soul, you'll understand why you need to be on purpose. So there's so much information I can share on this particular side. Hence the reason why I said we can go so deep on this episode, but it'll probably end up being 3 months long as opposed to just 20 minutes long. But the first primary thing is be on purpose. When you're on purpose, now what's going to start to kick in is when you're aligned with your genius drivers, which is again one of those elements there's 4 elements that makes up your life purpose. Your genius drivers, when you're aligned with those, now you're operating from the executive center part of the brain. Now, going back to the executive code and the genius pendulum, the top of the pendulum is the executive center part of your brain. Now, when you are operating from that side, now you've got one piece in the pie, let's put it that way. Okay. Now, what you want to be doing is you want to be operating from the unconscious side of things. So that's where now your spirit starts to come into play. So your unconscious is looking at how can you communicate with your unconscious on an ongoing basis. Now, what do we mean by that? A lot of people think, well, they'll understand a bit, well, I get a gut feeling. And therefore, if they follow their gut feeling, it's always turned out to serve them well. When they don't follow their gut feeling, well, then that's when things start to come awry. Your gut feeling is what people refer to as being your intuitive side. It's your connection with your unconscious, and it's your unconscious trying to give you the information to guide you in your path. What a lot of people try and do is they try and override and say that they are absolutely an awful lot more powerful than the unconscious, and they try and dictate to the unconscious how they want their life to be. That's not how life works. It's a two-way communication. But people operate in a way that it's a one-way communication, meaning they dictate to the unconscious. The more you have that two-way communication with your unconscious, now the more you're coming in line with your genius pendulum. I mean, your genius pendulum is becoming into equilibrium. When you're doing that, and you're now bringing that genius pendulum to equilibrium from a point of love, now that's when you are an awful lot more connected with the superconscious. And therefore, that's when you've got literally those 3 elements aligned with your genius pendulum. So how do you start? You start off with being on your purpose. I honestly, I cannot emphasize it enough. You start off then being on purpose in doing activities aligned with your genius drivers. And then now it's what are the things that are causing you to be out of a state of love? And as I said at the earlier part, being out of a state of love is where you got fear, worry, anxiety. You're judging yourself. You're judging other people. You are feeling shame or guilt. That's when your genius pendulum is out of equilibrium. So it's removing all of those and removing all the emotional triggers in order to bring your genius pendulum into equilibrium. Let me explain a couple of things. Let me explain soul, because people will probably want to try and figure out, okay, what's the difference between soul and spirit and body, and how do we communicate with each one? If you want to understand soul, you've got to understand that you're here to fulfill a mission. So as you're born into this lifetime, you have a soul contract to fulfill. That soul contract is your purpose. Now, you've got an overarching purpose, which, as I said before, which is to be your genius you, to live life fully, to experience, to love, and to evolve. That's your overarching purpose, and every single individual has that overarching purpose. So in order for the soul to experience, it has to come into human form, because it's the only way it can experience. And how I explain that is, if you cannot understand heat without first understanding cold. So you've got to have contrast. And by having contrast, that's how you get to experience. So a soul is here to fulfill its overarching purpose. And by doing that, it gets to live life fully and to evolve. Okay. But then you have, and every single individual has their own unique individual life purpose. Your soul contract is your individual life purpose. By you fulfilling your soul contract and being on purpose, you are working in line with what your soul desires for you to achieve. And by doing that, if it's your soul desire, you're in line with the superconscious. And again, people will use terminology in terms of God, higher power, higher mind, universe, whatever terminology you feel comfortable with. Now you're working in line with what the universe wants you to work with. So that's your soul. Your spirit, I want you to consider, because, and a lot of people use these terms interchangeably between soul and spirit. And when I'm working with a lot of people, I kind of use them as being one, because otherwise it becomes too complex for people to understand. The only easy way that I can probably explain it to people to understand the difference is you've got a soul. And think of your soul as being, it's that light. And again, you'll hear references to light in the Bible and so many different religion studies and so on. But your soul is your light. It is your connection. Your spirit, think of your spirit as being as the essence of your soul. So think of, for example, there's so many, all different types and species of flowers in the world. True?
Mm-hmm.
And of all the millions of different species of flowers in the world, every single flower, in some respects, has a separate identity. It has its own fragrance. It has its own characteristics. Your essence is your spirit. So while you have your soul, think of your spirit as being the essence of you. The two of them have to go hand in hand. Hence the reason why when I work with clients, I treat it as being the one, because without the one, you can't have one without the other. The two of them go hand in hand. So therefore, what you want to understand is your spirit is the essence of you. When I talk about your overarching purpose in life is to be you, it's your genius you. It's that essence of you. It's that genius within you that you are to become. So the soul is one thing, but it's the essence or the spirit surrounding that soul that makes that soul absolutely perfect and unique. And your role, your job here on this lifetime, in this earth, is literally to become your genius you, is to make manifest that spirit, that soul essence here in this lifetime, and to fulfill your life purpose. That's what you're here to do. How you communicate with that higher power, that God, that universe, is through your soul consciousness. That's very, very different than your own consciousness. Because people try and think, okay, well, they kind of force things to happen. But what they're doing, think of it from this perspective. When you're thinking, you're narrating everything that happens in your mind. But ultimately, when you literally are getting into a state of, and it happens in meditation, it happens in different activities that you'll do, and you'll have glimpses. People will have glimpses of this over their lifetime, but you can have more of this. That's the point I'm trying to make, or how I want to get people to get to, is they will have glimpses whereby they realize that their consciousness is separate to their spirit. They become the observer of who they truly are, that true essence of who they are. Because when you literally get into the point of whereby you're observing your thoughts, when you're observing your thoughts, are you the observer or are you what is being observed? And in those split seconds, in those moments, you'll get to understand that you're not necessarily your brain or your mind thinking of who you are. You've got a whole much deeper consciousness within you, which is your spirit. And it's that consciousness of what it is that you want to communicate with in order to make that connection with what we call God, universe, higher power, higher mind, the superconscious. So it's that connection with what you want to develop. And by doing that, now what you're doing is you're fulfilling your purpose in terms of your soul. You're living your purpose in terms of your true essence of who you are, which is your spirit. You've got that connection with that higher power, the superconscious. And how you are gaining that connection is through your body. And that's what people, again, that they haven't joined the dots. And it's the reason why there's so much information I share within the Pilot's Lounge when people are ready to delve even deeper into what I want to share. Your body, everybody will understand all the different senses that you'll have. You'll have, sight, taste, auditory, meaning hear, smell. You'll have feeling, meaning touch, tactile feeling. But you'll also have emotional feeling. So again, I treat it as a separate sense. And then you've also got your intuitive feeling or your intuitive sense, your sixth sense, what other people refer to it as. So people think they've only got a small number of senses, meaning you've got sight, hear, taste, and smell, and feeling, and touch. But actually, there's a few others in terms of your emotional feeling, but also that intuitive side, that sixth sense. Your superconscious, the superconscious and your unconscious are trying to communicate to you constantly through all of those senses. So the more you understand, for one better word, the language of each one of those senses and how your unconscious is communicating with you, now you are getting more in line with your equilibrium, as in, I'm going to correct that. The more you follow what your unconscious is telling you to do, well, then the more you're going to be guided towards becoming into equilibrium, your genius pendulum. So that's how the soul, the spirit, and the body work together in order for you to achieve what you're here to achieve and to fulfill what your soul was brought here to fulfill.
You reminded me how flying is a microcosm of life, how you're always learning, evolving. You're almost forced to in order to meet the demands of life and reach the next level.
Yeah. There's so many analogies, which is part of the reason why I enjoy aviation. But there's so many correlations. Yeah. And let me put it this way, the vast majority of people, but you'll often hear the phrase is, you're in your head again. So the vast majority of people are in their head. They're in their conscious thinking, and they're trying to work things out themselves using their conscious thinking. But that's not how you're here to operate. There's a phrase that people would have heard before, again, which goes along the lines of you're a spiritual being having a human experience. That's kind of feeding into what I'm explaining, but I'm going so much more deeper in understanding what it is that you're here to do and what it is that you're here to fulfill. So it's not a case that people are here, people are living life like a human, and they've literally, it's like as if they might as well have either forgotten or thrown out the spiritual side of them. Now, spiritual, again, let's make the distinction. Spirituality is completely different to religion, and spirituality is completely different to the spirit that is within them. So what you want to understand is that when you absolutely know, hence in my first book, I just recall it, in my first book that I wrote, Evolve, I think it's in the first chapter, I speak about when you absolutely know who you truly are, everything changes. And I mean, absolutely everything changes. Now, I don't mean, who are you in terms of your profession or your career or the lifestyle that you have. I'm not talking about that whatsoever. I'm talking about that true essence of absolutely who you are as a soul, as a spirit, and what you're here to absolutely fulfill. When you really totally and utterly get that, everything changes.
And so the best way to do that, one of the ways actually, is to, try and go on to that course that you have, new one. I haven't been able to look at it, but I will.
It's one of, from my perspective, and again, I know I'm biased in this just because of the work that I do. I'm here to try and reach as many people as I possibly can in the lifetime that I have left. One of the ways of how I could do that was to develop the course. Because I've worked so many years one-on-one with individuals and perfected the methodology that I've created, in order for an individual to know what their true life purpose is now, and that now is in the format of an online course. Now that enables so many people around the world to be reached. And by reaching so many people around the world and putting them on the right track and being on their life purpose, it means that then they're now, if they fulfill their purpose, and they, hence the reason why I have the Pilot's Lounge. The Pilot's Lounge is to help them to literally fulfill what their life purpose is. So one part is knowing your life purpose. The next part is, how can I support you in fulfilling your life purpose? When we do that, now, if you can imagine an individual is fulfilling their life purpose, and the thousands to millions to trillions of people they are to impact through the ripple effect is huge. That's what drives me in order to do the work that I do, in terms of to try and reach as many people as I possibly can, in order to put them on the right purpose, to make the difference that they're absolutely here to make. So yeah, one way, as you say, Nicole, is literally doing the course, going through the Pilot's Lounge, in order to actually turn your purpose into reality and fulfill what you're here to do, which is to fulfill your life purpose and to live in equilibrium as closely as you possibly can through the rest of your life. That's the starting, from my perspective, that's the starting point in absolutely everything for the rest of your life. People try and take shortcuts and, assume different things are going to happen. But your starting point in everything that I've done over the years, and believe me, I'm a long time doing this work. So, and that's apart from the intuitive insights that I get for clients. But the starting point for me is literally an individual being on their life purpose, and then everything else flows from there.
And in helping people fulfill or find out their life purpose, you're fulfilling your own life purpose.
Exactly. That's what I'm here to do. Absolutely. That's what I'm here to do. So the more I do that, the more I'm literally fulfilling my soul contract. Yeah.
And so instead of having to work one-on-one with people, the course, that's how you're going to be able to reach like so many more people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's my ultimate aim. And I do have more plans in relation to how I can extend that out so much more in order to reach more and more people. Because the more and more people, let me put it this way, let me give you a bit of an insight or a bit of a glimpse into my own purpose, my own vision. The more people I put on the right track and they're fulfilling their life purpose, the more they are in equilibrium. Meaning the more I'm supporting them through the format currently is the Pilot's Lounge, the more I'm supporting them to be in equilibrium and fulfilling their life purpose. Go back to the original question. How can we be in equilibrium? And the answer that I told you was, when we're in equilibrium, we're in a state of love. So if I reach 100 people and I get them to understand and be in a state of love, more so than when they're not, the difference that they make, not just for themselves, but the ripple effect that they make is massive, absolutely massive. I don't think anybody can dispute that we need an awful lot more love in the world. That's part of what I'm trying to do, let alone the more people I put on their right track and be on their purpose and fulfilling their purpose, the difference that they're going to make to the people through the ripple effect is absolutely huge. Do I have a big task to do? Yes, absolutely. Hence the reason why literally my life has been the way it has been, in terms of, in order for me to do this kind of work. Because I can, when I look back over it, I can absolutely see the absolute perfection in how this universe works, the absolute perfection. And so I'm literally, I don't say this lightly, I'm in a state of grace for literally the life that I've had to date, in order to enable me to do the work that I do.
And that's how you change the world?
One person at a time. Yeah. Okay. I kind of knew this episode was going to get a little bit deeper, because there's so much content that can be shared within this particular subject matter. You've probably just got a glimpse of what is absolutely possible to share in relation to this content. That's what we discussed, or the conversations, some of the conversations that we have within the Pilot's Lounge, let alone how we fulfill our purpose and how we build our businesses to make a bigger difference. If you want to find out more, as Nicole said, if you want to find out more about how you find your life purpose, head over to our website, paulwilliamdavis.com. You'll find a link to the course there. If you want to work one-on-one with me, you absolutely can. Again, all the links are there. I'm going to include all the links within the show notes as well. But the best part, honestly, or the best way is to go to our website, paulwilliamdavis.com. Everything is there for you. If you're there trying to figure out what your life purpose is, what direction you should go in, what you should be doing in your life, you know that there's a deeper inner feeling of you should be doing something more. Honestly, it's about discovering your life purpose. And if you've listened to our episodes before, you know I talk about life purpose in a completely different way to pretty much anybody that I've yet to come across. Because of my own natural gifts that I've developed or that I was born with, but also what the work that I've been doing for decades. So again, that website is paulwilliamdavis.com. But until next time, I wish you every success.